Morning, everybody. Welcome to Happy Mondays. Welcome to the Labour News Agenda Explained live from glorious Liverpool. And today, I'm Felicity Fox. Today, I'm joined by Labour peer Tom Watson and Scourge of the Press.
Not so sure about
this
that.
Is going to be fun. Now, this is the People's Paper Review, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. We will do our best to answer them for you. And we're going to get to the paper in a minute. But first off, we've got to address the appalling situation of what's been unfolding in Gaza and Israel over the past few days. The situation in the Middle East, Israeli civilians have been murdered by Islamic terrorists, and some in the Labour Party, some in the UK have some sympathy for the Palestinian attackers that's been going on with it. Now, a conflict was warned of last year, Tom, when Israel got its most extreme right-wing government in a lifetime, pretty much. It said that a new conflict was going to happen. There have been horrific wrongs on both sides, but nothing on the scale of what we've seen unfold, particularly with the rave in the desert, where 250 young people seem to have been murdered.
Yeah. Well, look, firstly, my heart goes out to all the families that have lost loved ones. This is probably one of the most historic moments of misery in the Middle East. It's resonant of the Yom Kippur War 50 years ago. And we awake this morning to realise that 250 kids have been slaughtered at a music festival. I chair an organisation in the UK called UK Music, and we've got a reception today at the Labour conference, and I'm sure we'll be having a minute's silence because you can't possibly imagine what it's like. Those parents have sent their kids to a joyous weekend. They're civilians, they're not military, they're innocent people, and they've been slaughtered on a terrorist attack. So, I mean, we can only hope that the things we're seeing unfold on our screens by the hour end as soon as possible. But it's a terrible situation.
We're going to find, aren't we, that hardliners on both sides are now going to get more hardline. There's going to be crackdowns. There's going to be lots more unpleasantness yet to come. And looking even further forward, the chances of there being a peaceful resolution in the near future are just non-existent, aren't they?
Well, I mean, there are allegations as yet unproven, but the modus operandi seems that this is Iranian-backed action. They have masterminded this plan, and they are trying to undermine the whole of the peace process across that region. You know, we've got the Abraham Accords that have brought bilateral peace agreements between Israel and countries like Morocco and the UAE, and the Saudi Arabians were beginning to get around the table. So this is a cynical attempt to destroy peace by another state. And the Israelis have to defend their borders from terrorist attacks. So I think for now, we just need to make the case that Israel needs to be able to defend itself. No country would allow that to happen. And then we need to look at longer term about how do we revisit the peace process? How can we make sure that everyone knows what the prize is, which is a peaceful, prosperous region?
Well, if everyone could agree we should live on the same bit of rock, the world would be a better place. Right, thank you for that, Tom. Now, inside the paper, inside the Mirror today, my colleague Kevin Maguire has been writing about how it is time for Keir Starmer to go bold, in his words, and be a bit more forward-thinking, should we say, on the front foot with policies and what Labour are going to do when they come into government. Tom, do you think that is going to be we have seen a few more policy announcements in the last few days because of conference. Do you think we're now entering that pre-election period where you start to get some actual meat on the bones, or not?
Well, the difficulty for Keir and his team now is they're doing so well in the polls. They now look like a government in waiting. But that's not how he sees it. He sees it as an opposition that needs to meticulously map out its policies over the next 12 months. I'm sure there'll be more announcements this week on that, but we've got a long way to go to a general election. It might not seem it for us because we live it every day. There's a very long way to go. So I think you will see announcements this week. For me, the only question the country is asking Labour to answer is, how do you sort out my cost of living crisis? So we've already seen my successor, Angie, do the announcement on affordable housing. You've seen Rachel today say we need to make sure that we've got export-led growth, and we need to do that through reform. And I think with Keir, you'll see other announcements as well. And then, of course, later in the week, we've got an NHS on its knees. And there'll be an expectation or a demand, I think, that West Streeting maps out how do we get that 7 million backdrop of waiting of procedures that's on the waiting list. So there's more to come. And if I was advising Keir, I would say don't set out your whole stall this week. Give yourself a bit of time before the general election.
But how long before the next election are we going to see a manifesto? I mean, is it going to be like 6 weeks when the thing's announced, the manifesto comes out, bang, that's it? Are we going to see it a bit earlier than that?
I think the foundations to the manifesto are in place. You've got Rachel's position on tough fiscal rules, making sure that people know where we stand on the economy. That we, how do we get growth again? How do we share out the benefits of growth? But your manifesto's never signed off until a general election. I mean, we don't even know who the Prime Minister will be at the next general election. It's probably going to be Rishi Sunak. On pass, if you've only got to look at the last 12 months, you'd be very foolish to bank on that in the next 12 months, I think.
Yeah, we'll have to see. Now, what do you think, everybody? Would you like Labour to start mapping out more seriously where it's going to be? Or are you prepared to wait and see things come out in drips and drabs so that the Tories don't nick it, or so things don't fall apart, or that perhaps it's just a little more firmed up for the situation we're going to find ourselves in whenever the next election does happen? A few people here today have been saying that they think it's going to come in May. Is that fair, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think Rishi Sunak, he's had a relaunch, he's reset the dial with a new team. I mean, if his polling numbers don't move significantly, I don't think it will be May. No, I think I sadly, and I'm sure your readers and viewers will be as appalled at this as I do. There's no reason why it won't go to January 2025. And if you think since June of this year, their poll ratings have put them lower than Michael Foot in the 1983 general election, you'll see why they're very worried about their own position.
Of course, what's happening in the Middle East, oil is going to go through the roof again. Inflation is probably going to rise again. And it's certainly not going to come down. That's going to make things even more difficult, isn't it?
Well, I think that's true. And I think the challenge for Labour is to say it didn't have to be this way. Of course, there is a Prime Minister that's been airbrushed out of history. She was only Prime Minister for 49 days, but she did crash the economy. The markets nearly collapsed. People nearly lost their homes. Their pensions were under threat. And we're all paying more for our mortgages now. We're paying more for our food in the shops because of that mismanagement of the economy.
Yeah.
And what
trust tax.
Well, what Rishi Sunak is trying to do is pretend that the last 13 years haven't happened, that he's a new kid on the block. That was the old Conservative Party. This is the new. I don't think he'll succeed in that, but there's a lot of play yet before we get to a general election.
But what do you think, everybody? Does Keir Starmer need a rebrand or not? Because he is 20 points ahead in the polls. Being cautious, being Keir, up to this point, has produced great results. Does he actually, could he anyway, because he's so set in the national consciousness that he's Mr. Steady, could he, if he is more radical, could he suddenly appear more radical than anyone would believe?
I think he is radical, but I don't think he's reckless. And I know him well enough to know that he's very cautious. He takes his time to work out a position, but once he's got a position, he executed it with absolute ruthless determination. And I think that's what people want to see in a Prime Minister, the ability to think, to take a firm decision but not be rash. So that caution is standing with him. He's also a football fan. And when I was the MP for West Bromwich Albion, You talk to any Albion fan, they'll say the worst situation at a football game is when you're 2-0 up, because you know you're going to lose 3-2. And that's so, that's
only at the Albion.
I'm afraid more so at the Albion, I'm afraid. probably not with his team Arsenal as much, but he. So I think he knows, and he started the conference at the start of the week to say, look, don't get, use that phrase. He said, don't get giddy with this. What he's really saying to our members and our young MPs is, look, we've still got to earn their votes, the trust of the people. They're repelled by what's gone on with Rishi Sunak's government, but we still need to build our case brick by brick. We can't take this for granted. And that requires us to be very systematic in the way we do that. So I think you'll get a Labour conference, perhaps not as exciting as previous conferences, but very comprehensive in the signpost it gives to the country before a general election.
Yeah, last year was quite giddy. There was a lot, when we were here last year, people were very excited. Oh my God, it's all looking good. This year it's definitely a little bit more and rigid and buttoned down.
As it should be. Changing a government is a big deal. Voters take it very, very seriously. In fact, there's a poll about a year ago of all the liberal democracies that said that to ask the simple question: do you think change is good or bad? And 54% of Britain said bad. So we're a cautious country, and I think they want to see a cautious prime minister after a decade of recklessness from number 10.
We've had the opposite of cautious for quite a while, haven't we? Now, on to the main story that's driving the news agenda here in Liverpool today, which is Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, is taking to the conference stage for her big speech. And she's given an interview to John Stevens of The Mirror, in which she's talking about, get this, growing the economy and tax cuts. Now, if that sounds eerily familiar to you, it's because you heard it only last week from the lips of Liz Truss at the Tory conference. What's going on? I mean, obviously, this is the kind of thing that any government wants to hear, but why is she intentionally echoing the other guys?
No, I think what she's saying is, the reality of the situation is we now have the highest taxes since the Second World War. People always used to say the Tories are a low tax party. They're the highest taxes you've ever seen. And I think what she's saying is, long term, when we fix the economy, when we go back to growth, we need to share some of that growth by giving people some of their own money back. And at the lower end, there are families struggling with tax. So I think this is all about cost of living. It's about how much money have you got in your pocket to pay the bills at the end of the month. People are finding their energy bills hard to pay. They're seeing their shopping bills go up, they need more money in their pocket to do the things that we used to take for granted a couple of years ago.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if you've got any questions from the viewers, because I'm not really able to see the screen very easily where we have the questions pop up. But what do you think? Do you think that tax cuts and growing the economy is something that should be Labour's priority? To be fair to Rachel, she's talking about tax cuts for working people as opposed to the tax cuts that the Tories were suggesting, which is kind of more at the top end, should we say. Yeah. So it is tax cuts, but for lower down. Now, Michael says, morning, Michael, what is Labour's inheritance tax policy? That's a curveball for you.
Yeah, okay, well, to your view, remember I'm the most retired ex-MP there is, right? So I'm not an expert on inheritance tax, but Labour's inheritance tax policy, first thing to say is only 3% of the nation, 3 in 100 people pay inheritance tax. So I don't think Labour will jeopardise that. But I don't think it won't widen it. It won't widen it to people.
It's one of those things, Michael, I think, where if you change the inheritance tax, the Tories have suggested it would cost you like £13 billion. It brings in a lot of money, and it's only going to affect very few people. The Rishi Sunaks of this world, for example, anyone who's got a huge amount of money that they're going to inherit when their parents pass away. Whereas most people, it's one of those things that people want to pay. It's a very rare tax. People want to be able to pay inheritance tax, and that this would affect them. So they've all got an opinion about it.
Yeah.
But the chances of any of us actually having to ever pay it is...
Well, that's the problem. It's a scare story, this, really. So when the Tories start talking about the inheritance tax, they almost want you to believe that it'll affect all of us. And actually, we all want to make sure our kids are okay if we sadly depart. And that's what happens. But if you're very, 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 very rich, you pay inheritance tax. Yeah. And it's a very small number of people who do.
Now, one of the things that Reeves has said today is that she's going to introduce a COVID fraud commissioner, so a public servant whose job it's going to be to try and claw back some of the billions and billions of pounds that were lost to fraud during the pandemic, because all the measures that were pushed out in a massive hurry, despite Labour warning at the time, don't do it quite so quickly, it's going to cause chaos. Now, what are the chances that a COVID fraud commissioner is themselves going to cost a lot of money to run?
Well, these things do cost, so she's obviously weighed that up. But I mean, the scale of the potential fraud or mismanagement of other people's money is enormous. Running it, I think the company said at least 10 billion. So I think it's not unreasonable that you get someone with forensic accounting skills to really go and find how did those taxpayers' money end up being wasted in that way. And we've had story after story of people closely aligned to government ministers getting these huge contracts during COVID, and then and their contracts not being delivered on. So I think there's a taxpayer interest here, and she's really just saying, look, we're not going to let people get away with this. We need to, if only to stop it from ever happening again. What are the rules to be learned here?
Yeah.
And the public inquiry is going to be important on that as well.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see how that goes, won't we? What do you think, everybody? Do you need to have a COVID fraud commissioner? Is that a useful spend of your taxpayer money? Maybe a few million a year, get back 10 billion. It's probably quite a good investment. What do you think? Get in the comments and let us know. But because we've got Tom here, we've got to ask him some other questions too. Now, a little while ago, Gordon Brown, your old boss, produced a report saying that your current job should be completely made irrelevant, it should be made redundant, and that there should be an elected chamber of the regions and nations instead of a House of Lords. But then, as soon as that was published, Labour was saying, well, we're going to have to appoint some new peers when we take over, because that's how you get legislation through.
Yeah.
For example, if you want to abolish the House of Lords, you have to have enough people in it to vote for that.
Yeah.
So what's going to happen, and when is it going to happen, if ever?
Yeah, well, I mean, you said a very important report, Gordon, people don't know this, but Labour could win the election and have a majority in the House of Commons. But in the House of Lords, that also votes on all legislation, they've got probably only about a quarter of the votes in there. So there's actually a fear that people could vote for a Labour government, and then you get a House of Lords that rejects everything that a Labour government, a democratically elected government, does. So it's a complicated one, because it will probably have to make more peers in order to get that legislation through. And some of that might be the reforms you can do to the House of Lords. And there's lots of things you can do there to put it right. I mean, there are 26 appointed bishops from the Church of England in the House of Lords. And some of the retired bishops on those benches also remain as crossbenchers. So we might be helping the Church of England by reducing the number of bishops there are, because that's a lot of their time and commitment. There are 92 hereditary peers whose relatives 500 years ago were friends with the monarch at the time, and you could definitely do work to reduce the numbers there. And there is a panel that does not have any statutory powers to oppose people going in the House of Lords, and we could put that on a statutory footing. And
they could actually block peerages, you mean?
they could actually block peerages rather than take away the power of the Prime Minister to do that. Yeah. So if they do that, that looks like reform. And that'll be quite hard work to get to that, but I think that's where Labour can be. But of course, it's very difficult because Labour's only got 1 in 4 votes. So it does mean we have to work with the other parties and try and build a consensus. The Liberal Democrats, the crossbenchers, and maybe even bishops. Members of the Conservatives. The bishops would probably be in favour of it, I think.
Yeah. Well, we'll have to see how that goes, won't we? Do you think you're still going to be in a job in 10 years' time in the House of Lords? Do you think that's going to be in that space?
I don't know. I might be an elected peer in 10 years' time, but I mean, we've just been talking about the next year to the general election. Trying to predict what the country looks like in 10 years is a difficult one. But
yeah.
I think about retirement a lot these days. So maybe not. Maybe it would be a blessing to abolish
House
of
Lords. Retirement, isn't it? I thought that was the main purpose.
It's flipping hard work.
It's
much harder work than it is in the Commons.
Not for everybody. Now, the other thing we've obviously got to ask Tom about while he's here is press reform. Because you were one of the main campaigners that created the Leveson inquiry and so on, and blew open the phone hacking scandal. Now, Leveson 2 never happened, the second part of that inquiry, which was going to look at the relationships between the press and politicians and go through our phones. Now, Labour hasn't really said very much about whether that would happen on its watch. Is it something that you would push for or would hope for? Or is it now completely irrelevant? So long ago, it's all solved, we don't need to worry about it.
Well, I guess I've got good news and bad news for you here, Susan. I mean, the good news is I think everyone knows the context with which that inquiry came about a decade ago has changed. Tabloid newspapers in particular are under a lot of financial pressure, and I think everyone recognises that. But I think what the viewers might not know is even in the courts now, there are 1,000 cases being looked at to do with criminal activity in the newsrooms of Britain's national newspapers. And so for a politician to not address that and to say, are we satisfied that there are protections in place to see a phone hacking scandal happen again, I think would be negligent. So Labour's still got to do its working out for the manifesto on whether it adopts the method that was recommended by the eminent judge in the public inquiry. But I think it does recognise that times have changed.
Yes, it does seem perhaps that one of the things that may be more relevant to the world we live in now and the current media landscape is Ofcom, and perhaps having better regulations for that in regards to have some news channels now, GB News has come along, it's obviously got very obvious political leanings, which is not what we are used to in this country, and most people don't appreciate. And then there's shows like this, there's social media, which is completely unregulated. I can do what I like, within reason, of course.
You don't want to brag about that. You'll be giving politicians an idea. Yeah.
So things have changed so much in the days of Leveson. The power of the print media has dropped away a lot, but this comes from a print media outlet. This is a new thing to worry about, really, isn't it? Social media and TV and Ofcom.
Well, I certainly think politicians need to spend more time looking at the big tech companies who essentially use their get-out clauses in law to say that they're not publishers. And so when you look at a company like Facebook, that admittedly has tried to reform in the last few years, but Facebook live streamed a massacre in New Zealand because its algorithm directed Facebook users to it. That is markedly worse than some of the things the tabloid newspapers have been accused of. So I'm giving you a little bit here. Right? I'm giving you a little bit here. But 10 years ago, just uniformly breaking the law because you knew the police wouldn't investigate you and Parliament wasn't concerned about it.
I think we need to find it. I wasn't.
No, I'm not. I don't mean you. I mean whatever the grammatical thing is. Absolutely not you. Parliament had to act on that.
Yeah, no, fair enough. It was a scandal and we caused our own problems, don't we? Now, another question is from Dennis. I am an expat living in Western Australia. Am I entitled to vote in the upcoming elections? Dennis, who's an expat in Australia. Can he vote in our elections here?
It depends how long you've been there, Dennis, I think. But if you can, and if you want me to follow up, I'll check for you.
Yes.
And I'll try and make sure you can vote Labour by post.
Expats can vote in this country, but you do have to register for that. Like you said, it depends a bit how far you've gone away. So, we had lots of expats living in Spain who were voting on Brexit referendum, for example. I think it might be different for different kinds of voting. There's different rules. So you've kind of got to have a look into it perhaps a little bit. Before we move on to good news, are there any more questions? No, that seems to be about it from our viewers so far. Well, thank you, Tom, for taking us through all that and dealing with all the extra stuff that we've chucked at you, because why not? He's chucked some stuff at us. Now, we do have some good news. We found some in the world, and here it is. Now, last night, as we said, the Pride of Britain Awards were held. The Mirror and ITV are celebrating basically unsung heroes, people who don't get an awful lot of attention. One of them is a 13-year-old called Jack, who wanted to raise £250 in memory of his dad, who had served in the armed forces. Now, his dad actually was Lee Rigby, and he was murdered by Islamist terrorists on the streets of London, as most people can remember. And Jack was just 2. And so many people were inspired by Jack's bid to walk a marathon that they actually contributed even more. And he managed to raise £55,000 rather than just the £250 he was aiming for. And last night at the awards do, he actually managed to double that to 100 grand with more donations from the audience, which is just astonishing. All that money is going to a charity called Scotty's Little Helpers, which is for children of military families that have been bereaved. Tom, this is particularly relevant when you consider what's happening in the Middle East at the moment. Yeah. Is this proof that, out of fundamentalist horror, something good can happen?
You'd rather it's not, but yes.
And well, it's often the driver, isn't it?
Yeah. And what a lovely, lovely, lovely boy. I know his dad would be proud of him, and I'm sure we're all proud of him too. But good on the Mirror for doing the Pride of Britain Awards, where these kind of sacrifices that people make or contributions people make to make the world a better place are rewarded.
Well, when we have news like we've got coming out of the Middle East, it's nice to be able to have something else, isn't it? And just to think that the world is full of good people, generally speaking, and just one or two idiots upsetting it for everybody else.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tom, for going through all this with us this morning. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. If you want to watch Pride of Britain, it's on ITV on Thursday at 8 o'clock, and you can sit there and just immerse yourself in how wonderful human beings are for the rest of the week is causing too many problems. Rachel Reeves' speech will be on these channels later on today, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of the Labour News Agenda, this time with Fred Thomas, the prospective parliamentary Labour candidate for Plymouth Moorview, who is taking on the Veterans Minister, Johnny Mercer, at the next general election. So come back then and have a look at what he's got to say about Veterans Affairs. It will be very interesting. Until then, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all again tomorrow. Ta-ta, bye.